It always takes exactly 3 seconds for your career to collapse, and I spent every single one of them counting down. 1. The heavy oak door of the 42nd floor executive conference room slams open with a loud crack that shakes the thick glass panels surrounding our floor. 2. 14 heads snap instantly toward our chief executive officer as his face flushes crimson with intense rage. 3. His manicured index finger jabs straight across the polished mahogany table directly at my chest, while those bitter words echo off the floor-to-ceiling windows. It is always the quiet ones. My collar tightened instantly. As 26 eyes spun around to lock onto me, their expressions shifting rapidly from morning exhaustion to sharp suspicion in less than a heartbeat. That is the exact second you realize 6 years of flawless corporate loyalty mean absolutely nothing when a powerful executive needs someone to take the fall for a massive disaster. My name is Dean Albright, and I am 48 years old. Before I detail how a cold Thursday morning meeting at Apex Vertex Global turned into an outright corporate war, let me share how I ended up sitting in that hot seat. For 6 years as a senior financial compliance analyst, I was always the first person to log into the corporate network at 6:15 in the morning, and the very last person to shut down his workstation at 7:30 in the evening. 6 years of thorough thank you Dean notes from senior project managers. 6 years of meticulous balance sheet reconciliation, and 6 years of making sure every single dollar moved across state lines was completely legitimate. I spent my career operating behind the scenes, ensuring that corporate transactions strictly complied with federal banking statutes and international trade guidelines. I took genuine pride in my work, knowing that precision is the bedrock of real financial integrity. Yet in 3 seconds flat, I became the most toxic person in the entire building. Our chief executive officer, Winston Drake, stood at the head of the conference room, pacing back and forth like a caged predator. Behind him, the high-definition wall projector displayed a spreadsheet with a massive bold red ledger figure, $3,420,000. Someone sitting in this room has been systematically siphoning funds from Apex Vertex Global, Winston declared, dropping his voice into that controlled, dangerous whisper executives use when they are preparing to ruin a subordinate's life forever. We have an unexplained cash discrepancy of over $3 million across our primary clearing accounts, and I demand immediate personal accountability from this unit. The 14 of us sat completely motionless in our ergonomic leather chairs. To my left sat Bradley Cross, our special projects project director, who always wore an unbuttoned suit jacket and openly resented my restricted access to raw transaction logs. Next to him was Clara Finch, our meticulous office operations manager who kept track of every security badge swipe in the building. Across the table was Travis Polk, our quiet systems architect, who rarely spoke unless explaining code, and Nora Bailey from Client Relations, who had just returned from parental leave. The rest of the table comprised senior financial officers and international logistics coordinators, handling our highest volume commercial contracts across the country. We were considered the elite special division of Apex Vertex Global, trusted with sensitive enterprise accounts. You should understand that my specific role was financial compliance specialist. It was my sole responsibility to verify that every electronic transaction complied with federal financial regulations and internal corporate governance policies. The bitter irony of Winston staring down his nose at me was not lost on anyone present in that room. Financial irregularities have been accumulating for 11 months, Winston continued, stepping closer to my chair as his expensive Italian leather shoes clicked heavily on the polished hardwood floor. Clever microtransactions routed through automated batch files. But our external auditing firm finally flagged the anomalous pattern late last night. My throat went dry as a desert. 11 months ago was the precise time Winston personally signed an executive directive transferring me into this specialized compliance unit, claiming he required a dedicated analyst with my obsessive attention to detail. Sitting under those harsh fluorescent lights, the entire sinister trap suddenly snapped into focus. He had not transferred me to protect the corporate treasury. He had transferred me to build a pre-packaged, quiet fall guy. He knew that I was a reserved man who rarely engaged in office politics, assuming I would panic when confronted by corporate authority. He calculated that my quiet nature would make me an easy target during an executive ambush. Winston slammed a thick manila folder onto the conference table right in front of my hands. $3.4 million cleared through dozens of microtransfers, all verified under credentials tied to this division, he said, leaning over my shoulder until I could smell his expensive cologne, approved by someone who believed he was far cleverer than the board of directors. Someone who stays late every single night to cover his digital tracks. He spat the words out with deliberate theatricality. It is always the quiet ones who assume nobody is monitoring their routine work. Sir, I said, keeping my tone completely level despite the heavy surge of adrenaline pouring through my veins. There has to be a severe misinterpretation of the underlying audit logs. Winston let out a short, mocking laugh that cut through the tense room like a razor blade. I do not make misinterpretations, Mr. Albright, but you clearly made a massive, fatal miscalculation. Internal security is standing outside those glass doors, and federal authorities have already been alerted. They will be arriving shortly to escort you out of this building in custody. The room seemed to shrink around me. Bradley Cross leaned forward and muttered loudly enough for everyone at the table to hear, "Check his compliance terminal logs right now." He has had administrative override access for years. Already completed, Winston said smoothly, a smug smile touching his lips. The audit trail points directly to Dean's authorization token. That was the exact moment fear dissolved into cold, absolute clarity. When you realize you have reached the absolute bottom of a rigged game, panic disappears completely. In its place comes a sharp, unshakable composure. My hands stopped trembling. I sat up straight, reached into my suit jacket pocket, and retrieved my personal smartphone alongside a heavy metallic encrypted hardware token. "Sir," I said, my voice cutting through the room with a calm authority that caught every executive off guard. "Before the federal authorities arrive, you might want to look at what is actually stored on this network drive." Winston sneered, crossing his tailored arms over his chest. "A written confession? How thoughtful of you, Dean. Save it for your criminal defense attorney." "Not a confession," I replied quietly, looking him straight in the eyes. "A complete digital audit vault." I plugged the metallic hardware token into the conference table's media hub and tapped a single command on my phone screen to initiate an encrypted wireless broadcast. The projection screen behind Winston flickered instantly, replacing his red, highlighted spreadsheet with a detailed, real-time forensic database interface displaying cryptographic validation trees. 14 months ago, 3 months before you transferred me to this special projects unit, I noticed subtle structural discrepancies in our clearinghouse accounts, I explained, looking directly at the senior colleagues present in the room. Small automated batch deductions, each kept under $10,000 to avoid triggering routine automated compliance alerts under federal wire fraud regulations. I formally reported those anomalies to my former department supervisor, who dismissed my concerns and instructed me to ignore them. So, as part of my mandatory professional obligations under federal compliance standards, I began archiving parallel immutable system logs. The room went dead silent. Bradley Cross shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair, his eyes darting anxiously towards the projection screen. "I did not archive these files out of malice," I continued, speaking clearly so every colleague could record every detail. "I archived them because I refused to put my signature on fraudulent records. For 14 months, every single time a financial record was modified in our enterprise resource database, my automated background script captured a cryptographic hash of the original state, the exact server timestamp, the originating IP address, and the specific user credentials authorizing the modification. Every file was cryptographically hashed using double-blind security protocols and mirrored across off-site servers." I touched the responsive screen of my phone, zooming in on 6 specific high-value transactions totaling $3,420,000. "Including," I said, pointing directly at the glowing blue lines projected on the wall, "the 6 distinct instances where Chief Executive Officer Winston Drake personally utilized his administrative executive override key to bypass secondary compliance checks. Each transaction was routed directly to an offshore shell entity registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Vanguard Horizon Holding LLC. Winston's face drained of color so fast he looked as though he had seen a ghost. The thick veins on his neck bulged as he stumbled back against the executive whiteboard. "You recorded internal administrative communications?" he demanded, his voice cracking into a high-pitched strain. "That is a direct violation of company technology agreements and corporate non-disclosure policies. Actually, under state law, this is a single-party consent jurisdiction for digital logging of corporate network assets," I answered with deliberate calm. "Furthermore, under federal law, documenting active wire fraud is explicitly protected under whistleblower protection statutes, specifically Sarbanes-Oxley provisions under 18 United States Code Section 1514. I have not just recorded system logs, Mr. Drake. I have documented every single unauthorized file alteration, including your personal cryptographic signature on the override requests that you tried to frame me for approving." The conference room descended into complete, breathless silence. 14 senior professionals sat frozen, watching the power dynamic in the building invert like a massive earthquake. Winston straightened his silk tie in a frantic attempt to regain command of the room. "Everyone leave the room immediately," he barked, his voice rising into a sharp, desperate command. "Clear the floor right now. Dean and I will address this internal matter privately." Nobody moved an inch, did you hear me? "Clear out now," Winston shouted, slamming both palms violently onto the mahogany table. Bradley Cross hesitated, standing up halfway, but Clara Finch reached out and placed a firm hand on his sleeve, pulling him back down. "Sit back down, Bradley," Clara said sharply, her tone colder than ice. "Mr. Albright has the actual digital receipts. I think we should all stay right here and watch this unfold." Winston's personal smartphone buzzed violently against the mahogany surface. He glanced down at the glowing screen, and his jaw slackened completely. The caller identification displayed the direct line of the corporate legal desk and external federal law enforcement liaison. "This meeting is adjourned," Winston muttered, his voice trembling as he grabbed his phone and turned toward his private office door. "Dean, step into my office right now." "No, Mr. Drake," I said, remaining seated with my hands folded neatly on the table. "I will not step anywhere with you. For 6 long years, I had been the invisible analyst, the reliable employee who worked late into the evening, fixed executive reporting errors, never asked for public credit, and absorbed every extra workload without complaint. The quiet man in the corner office. But that quiet man was gone forever. Everything displayed on that projection wall has already been mirrored across 3 geo-redundant encrypted servers," I stated plainly, "including my personal legal counsel's vault. And you do not have to worry about calling the federal authorities, Winston. Because 20 minutes before I walked into this conference room, I personally transferred the entire verified forensic package to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Division and the Securities and Exchange Commission Enforcement Division." Winston's face turned a horrific shade of dark purple. "You foolish, arrogant idiot," he snarled, taking a threatening step back toward my chair. "Do you have any idea what you have done to this company? Do not speak to him like that." Clara Finch interrupted firmly, standing up from her seat at the end of the table. "You attempted to send an innocent man to federal prison for your own criminal theft. You are completely finished, Winston." The next 20 minutes moved in a surreal haze. Winston retreated into his corner office suite and slammed the heavy double doors, attempting to lock himself inside. Outside in the main hallway, security guards stood awkwardly near the elevator bank, unsure of whether to enforce the CEO's frantic orders or follow the instructions of the incoming corporate legal team. I sat quietly at the center of the conference table, my hands resting flat against the cool mahogany wood. Despite my calm demeanor, my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. All my life, I had followed every single rule in the book. I paid my taxes early, followed corporate policies to the letter, kept every single receipt, and avoided interpersonal conflict whenever possible. Yet, despite all that caution, I had been forced to stand at the edge of a cliff and fight for my absolute freedom against the most powerful executive in the corporation. I realized that keeping detailed receipts is not about paranoia. It is about self-preservation in a corporate ecosystem, where predators take advantage of honest workers. At precisely 9:45 that morning, 4 federal agents wearing dark business suits entered through the glass doors of the 42nd floor. They did not cause a public disturbance, nor did they draw weapons. Instead, they walked directly to Winston's office, accompanied by our external corporate legal team. They presented a formal federal search warrant for his digital hardware and electronic logs under 18 United States Code, Section 1343 and Section 1519. When they escorted Winston Drake out 10 minutes later, he was not in handcuffs, but his public humiliation was complete. As he was walked past rows of open cubicles, where hundreds of employees stood silently watching, his eyes locked onto mine one final time. "You think you won something today, Dean?" Winston whispered, his voice laced with bitter hatred as he passed my chair. "Nobody hires a whistleblower. You just committed professional suicide in this industry." His venomous words lingered in the quiet room long after the executive elevator doors closed behind him. Over the next 3 weeks, Apex Vertex Global underwent a massive corporate implosion. Forensic auditors swarmed the 42nd floor, taking over entire conference rooms and auditing every single ledger entry going back 3 full years. The board of directors held emergency weekend sessions, and 4 senior vice presidents who had assisted Winston in disguising transaction overrides resigned abruptly, citing personal reasons. The Special Projects Division was temporarily suspended, and all 14 members of our team were placed on administrative paid leave while federal investigators sorted through the wreckage. During those 3 long weeks, I sat in my quiet apartment overlooking downtown Chicago, surrounded by corporate job listings that I was too paralyzed to pursue actively. Winston's parting words echoed in my mind every single night. Nobody hires a whistleblower. I had saved myself from a multi-year federal prison sentence, but at what cost? Was my 20-year career in corporate compliance permanently ruined? Would other corporate leaders view me as a threat rather than a guardian of integrity? I pondered whether standing up for the truth would ultimately leave me isolated in the corporate world. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Nora Bailey. "Hey, have you seen the latest internal press release?" Nora asked without preamble. "No," I replied, sitting up on my couch. "What occurred?" "The board of directors formally terminated 4 more senior executives this morning," Nora said, her voice filled with quiet awe. "The external forensic team confirmed your audit logs down to the exact dollar." But that is not all, Dean. They discovered that Winston's total embezzlement scheme did not stop at $3.4 million. Over the last 24 months, he siphoned over $8,700,000 across multiple offshore shell accounts. I took a deep breath. $8,700,000. The sheer scale of the executive corruption was staggering. "There is something else," Nora continued softly. "The board chairwoman, Audrey Vance, requested an emergency meeting with you tomorrow morning at corporate headquarters. She wants you in the main boardroom at 9 sharp. My laugh was hollow. "For what reason?" "To hand me my final severance package and a corporate non-disclosure agreement." "I do not think so, Dean," Nora said. "Word around the executive floor is that they realize you are the only person who actually protected the shareholders when everyone else looked away." The next morning, I dressed in my sharpest charcoal gray suit, tied my tie with deliberate precision, and walked back into the corporate headquarters of Apex Vertex Global. As I passed through security, the guards nodded to me with visible deference. Employees in the elevator whispered quietly as I stepped inside. When I entered the executive boardroom on the 50th floor, 7 members of the board of directors were seated around the massive oval glass table. At the center sat Audrey Vance, the board chairwoman, alongside Evelyn Ward, the lead external legal counsel. I sat down in the chair directly opposite Chairwoman Vance, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance," I said simply. Evelyn Ward, the lead counsel, adjusted her glasses and opened a thick leather binder on the table. "As you know, Mr. Albright, Our internal investigation confirmed that Chief Executive Officer Winston Drake operated an elaborate embezzlement network totaling $8,700,000 over 24 months. Your meticulous record-keeping prevented catastrophic financial ruin for this corporations and saved us from catastrophic regulatory penalties from federal agencies. I remained completely silent, letting the quiet hang heavy in the room. I had learned over the years that powerful executives become deeply uncomfortable when faced with calm, unyielding silence. Audrey Vance leaned forward, resting her elbows on the glass table. Mr. Albright, Apex Vertex Global is facing a severe crisis of institutional credibility. Shareholders are terrified, clients are questioning our governance, and regulatory bodies are scrutinizing every single department. We need to rebuild our financial compliance structure from the ground up, and we need someone whose integrity is beyond question. Here it came. The executive offer. We would like to offer you the position of Director of Corporate Integrity and Chief Compliance Officer, Audrey Vance stated clearly. You will report directly to the Board of Directors, bypass executive interference, receive an annual base salary of $350,000, and have complete authority to rebuild the compliance division. My heart beat faster, but I did not smile. A year ago, such an offer would have seemed like an impossible dream. A director-level appointment with direct board access and double my previous compensation. But I was no longer naive. I recognized why they were offering it to me. They needed my reputation to restore market confidence. They wanted to use my whistleblowing as an ethics shield to prove to Wall Street that the company had cleaned house. And if I decline your offer? I asked quietly. Evelyn Ward slid a document across the table toward me. If you choose to leave, you will receive a generous 2-year severance package, full executive references, and a standard mutual non-disclosure agreement. They were offering to pay me a massive sum of money to walk away quietly if I refused to be their corporate shield. I looked down at the signature line of the non-disclosure agreement, then looked back up into Audrey Vance's eyes. 6 years ago, I would have signed that paper and taken the money out of fear, I said, my voice steady and firm. But I am not that person anymore. I will consider accepting the position of Chief Compliance Officer, but only under 4 non-negotiable conditions. Audrey Vance raised an eyebrow, while Evelyn Ward paused with her pen hovering over her notebook. This was clearly not part of their prepared script. We are listening, Mr. Albright. Audrey said cautiously. First, I demanded, my entire 14-person compliance team must receive a formal company-wide public exoneration sent to every employee and shareholder, along with a 20% performance bonus to compensate for the emotional distress and professional damage caused by Winston's false accusations. Evelyn Ward jotted down the note quickly. That is reasonable and entirely doable. Second, I continued, I will have sole authority to personally interview, vet, and retain all existing financial staff. Furthermore, I am appointing Clara Finch as Deputy Director of Operations and Travis Polk as Lead System Security Architect. Audrey Vance nodded slowly. Agreed. Third, I want Winston Drake's former corner office suite on the 42nd floor converted into the permanent headquarters of the Integrity Division. Evelyn Ward blinked in surprise. The executive corner suite? That is traditionally reserved for executive vice presidents. Nothing about what happened in that conference room was traditional, I countered sharply. If I am to rebuild compliance, every executive in this building needs to see that integrity sits in the corner office. Audrey Vance exchanged a long look with the rest of the board members, then nodded firmly. Done. What is your 4th condition? 4th, I said, leaning forward. Absolutely no non-disclosure agreement. I will not disparage this company, so long as corporate governance acts in good faith, but I will never sign away my legal right to report financial irregularities to federal authorities. The temperature in the boardroom dropped instantly. Evelyn Ward frowned. That is highly unusual for a senior officer-level contract, Mr. Albright. So is being accused of $3 million wire fraud by your own chief executive officer, I replied. I did not create this crisis, but if I am going to lead this company forward, I need to know I am building a legitimate institution, not a cover-up. For 45 minutes, we negotiated every single clause of the executive employment contract. By the time I walked out of that boardroom, I had every single one of my conditions secured in writing. The following Monday morning, I walked into the corner office suite on the 42nd floor. The room was massive, featuring floor-to-ceiling glass windows, offering a panoramic view of Lake Michigan and downtown Chicago. I ran my fingers along the edge of the polished mahogany desk, where Winston Drake had once sat plotting how to frame me, and took a deep breath. A knock at the open door broke my thoughts. Clara Finch stood in the doorway carrying a small potted desk plant. "A workspace gift," Clara said with a warm smile, placing it on my desk. "It is a resilient succulent, extremely hard to kill even when subjected to harsh environments. Just like your career, apparently." I laughed, a genuine, relaxed laugh that felt like the lifting of a heavy iron weight. "Thank you, Clara." "Are Travis and Nora ready?" "They are waiting in the main compliance hub," Clara replied, her expression turning serious. "Everyone is ready to get to work, Dean. You really turned this place around." Over the next 6 months, our newly formed Integrity Division worked tireless 16-hour days. We implemented what became known internally as the Albright Compliance Protocols, a real-time, dual-key immutable digital ledger system that made unauthorized executive financial overrides mathematically impossible. Every transaction over $50,000 required triple-factor cryptographic authentication and automatic archiving to an off-site compliance vault. We proved to corporate leaders that transparency and efficiency could coexist in a modern corporation. Every team member understood that our department stood as a fortress against corruption. We unearthed several minor reporting discrepancies left behind by Winston's former enablers, fixing them transparently and submitting corrected filings to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Our team grew from 14 to 22 dedicated analysts. Bradley Cross was formally terminated after internal investigations revealed he had accepted $50,000 from Winston to turn a blind eye to ledger alterations. He was subsequently indicted alongside Winston by federal prosecutors under 18 United States Code Section 1343. 4 months into my new role, federal indictments were formally unsealed by the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. Winston Drake was charged with 12 counts of federal wire fraud under 18 United States Code Section 1343, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice under 18 United States Code Section 1519. When the preliminary hearing took place in early December, I sat on the witness stand in a crowded federal courtroom. Wearing a sharp gray suit, I calmly answered questions from the federal prosecutor for 4 hours, referring to my 14 months of time-stamped digital audit logs. Sitting at the defense table, Winston Drake looked gaunt, wearing an oversized jumpsuit, his former arrogance entirely shattered. He pleaded guilty to all charges 3 weeks later and was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. 2 years after that fateful morning, when Winston slammed the conference room door, Audrey Vance and the board of directors unanimously appointed me Chief Financial Officer of Apex Vertex Global. On the day the press release announcing my CFO appointment went public, a plain envelope arrived at my office desk. Inside was a newspaper clipping of the announcement with a single line written in dark ink across the top. "You won." I did not write back, nor did I file it away. I simply tossed it into the recycling bin. True victory in life does not require petty validation from those who tried to destroy you. Living well, building something honorable, and standing firm in your integrity is the ultimate answer. Sometimes people ask me if my story is unique. Corporate greed exists in every industry. Corrupt executives routinely attempt to scapegoat subordinates, and whistleblowers often face tremendous hardship. But what made the difference in my life was refusing to be passive. Being a quiet person does not mean being weak, and taking your time to document the truth is the most powerful weapon you can ever possess. If you are reading this or listening to my story, and you find yourself sitting in an office feeling invisible, timid, or overwhelmed by powerful people who demand that you compromise your values, remember this. Your meticulous attention to detail is not overthinking. Your insistence on keeping receipts is not paranoia. Your quiet dedication to doing things right might just save your life one day. And if you are an arrogant executive who believes your title makes you untouchable while you exploit the quiet people around you, take warning. The quiet ones are watching, they are documenting every move, and when the moment comes, they will not just speak up, they will reshape the entire world around you.